What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about why you don't look like you lift. It's a little clickbaity, emotive title there, but I think that is actually kind of a reasonable thing that people would say they want, and we'll get to that in just a second. But as far as setting the scene, it's usually a situation where you feel like, somebody feels like they're doing all the things and doesn't look like they're the kind of person who's doing the things they're doing, right? They feel like they aren't getting the return on their investment that they deserve based on, the commitment that they have and the action that they've been doing for the length of time that they've been doing it. And I'll start by saying, just wanting to kind of, in air quotes, look like you lift, to me, feels like a reasonable request if you, have been checking some boxes when it comes to actually lifting, which we will get to, right? That brings up our first reason why you might not look like you lift. Is like wanting to or expecting to look like you lift is a reasonable request if you've been lifting, right? And again, we'll talk about kind of what stones you should turn over, knobs you should turn as far as making sure you're doing enough on that front. But I tend to kind of want to divert people's main attention away from like crazy ambitious aesthetic pursuits as like the main driver of why they go into the gym and why they enjoy training and what they do it for. But in the same breath, there's nothing inherently wrong with like wanting to, air quote, I want to look good naked, or I want to look like I lift, or I want to be muscular, or aesthetics in general. There's nothing wrong with caring about aesthetics. There is nothing inherently wrong with that. Contextually, maybe we can take that too far and all that stuff. But within this pursuit of aesthetics, I think, hey, most of the time I communicate with somebody who says the phrase, I want to look like I lift, I get where they're coming from. They're feeling like they're doing something and they just would like what they feel to be a reasonable return on that investment. I want to look like I do the thing I do, which I understand. So I want to be sympathetic to, like, I get that on face value, this sentence to me makes sense. I want to look, if I relate it to cardio, which is ironic because cardio doesn't change the way you look basically at all. But I from my numbers, it's funny, I feel this way about my cardio too, so I really am sympathetic to it. Like, I don't need to be like mega fast. I don't have crazy ambitious cardio goals, but I kind of want to be able to talk about my mile time or my 5K time or my half marathon time. And I want to be just good enough where somebody knows that I do this, like I don't have crazy goals, but I want to be good enough where I'm like, yeah, I ran a 6:22 mile and someone's like, oh, that guy probably trains for that. Like I just want what I feel is a fair return on my investment with the amount of training and for the length of time I've been doing it. I don't think that that's an unreasonable at face value request. So let's talk about, I want to talk about two kind of important points before we get into the, let's say, meat and potatoes of, I think, why people are going to listen to this podcast, which is like a checklist of things that they can go through to make sure they're doing all the things they need to do to ultimately look like they lift. But the first thing before we jump into all that is that for your definition of look like you lift, like your expectations are skewed and it's not your fault. Social media has messed us up, man. Like steroids, Photoshop, the kind of elite genetics that are loved by the algorithm, the curated posing and lighting and angles and taking 1,000 shots to get that one Instagrammable pic. Like, it's not normal. And whether you know it or not, your expectations are an aggregate of your visual diet, the stuff that you are consuming consciously and subconsciously as you thumb flick through all of your social media feeds. And the expectation of kind of like what a physique that works out looks like is going to be propped up and made out of this like Frankenstein of perfection that you see on social media. And these people usually have, again, elite genetics, or they're photoshopping stuff, or they're on taking, illegal or not, whatever. I don't give the legality of steroids is besides the point necessarily in this conversation, but taking steroids, or they're totally curating these pictures in some way. And I just feel like, I'm not saying you, the listener, right now, because I don't know where everybody's expectations are, but on average, I feel like I don't want this podcast to just be, hey, lower your expectations. That's not necessarily what we always have to do. But damn, I think it's pretty fair to say on average, our expectations are pretty messed up from social media. And sometimes I'll have somebody be like, hey, I just I don't feel like I'm asking too much. I just want to look like this. And then they'll send me a picture and I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like this person though has probably been training for a decade, tracking every macro for a decade, like probably has pretty favorable genetics, lower body fat, more muscle, which we'll talk about. And I don't want people to stop having goals. I don't want people to stop trying to push themselves to get stronger or even change their physique. That's fine with me on a baseline if people are doing it in a good headspace. I just think there is an element of like, I bet you 20, whatever, prior to social media, like look like you lift, or look muscular. Like if you go back and you look at 1950s bodybuilders, 1940s bodybuilders, like they look like an average natural bodybuilder of today's age, right? And what I mean by that is like we've been getting bigger and bigger and more muscular like forever, basically, like almost linearly. And so it's just kind of screwing all of these expectations up a little bit. Point number 2, before we go into this a little bit, is that you do look like you lift. And I've made this point on social media before. It's like you do look like you lift. Every time you move the furniture without someone's help, every time you carry in the groceries or you scoop up your kids, no problem, or you go out and you play sports with them, like lifting is so much more than aesthetics. Although, like I get it's allowed to be both, and we will get to that. But you do look like you lift, man. You do. You look like you lift when you don't need somebody's help to do X, Y, Z, or you pull the car seat out from the car and you're carrying 8 different things. Hopefully safety first with that car seat there, close to my heart right now. But you do. I think of a lot of clients and people I've worked with in the past who have talked to me about, I just want to look like I lift. And I'm like, you're a complete badass. Like, have you looked at one of your form videos where you're doing this perfect RDL technique with, your body weight or whatever? Like, you do look like you lift. And I know that people are going to be listening to this like, shut up, Jordan. Like just stop beating around this, like get off this, like, like we want to talk about the aesthetics, like stop talking about all this, like inner, like feeling positive about stuff. Like, but that needs to be there too. It can't just be, I'm lifting so that I look a certain way. That's not sustainable. It's not going to be the most enjoyable way to go through this. And so you do look like, if you're out there, I just want to look like I lift. I bet you there are moments in your life where the people around you know that you lift. Like you do something and they're like, oh yeah, like, that's because you're strong, right? And the third is, this is another moment, this sort of like, why don't I look like I lift? Like it's another moment of the shoulds. And, I should be leaner. I should be more muscular. I should be losing weight faster. I should be blah, blah, blah. Like, and I don't want to be, not sympathetic here. And I'm going to go through a lot of boxes you can check, I promise. Like I'm going to go through a lot of things that you can make sure you're doing to, improve your outcomes for sure. And if you're missing something, I got you. But this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this towards the end, but this case of the shoulds, I should be this, I should be that, I should look like this. Triggering is a weird word. The word triggering is triggering, so I don't love using it. I feel like people have an aversion to that word. But like, to me, I think it's something that I've dealt with personally, this idea of like, should this, should that, I should be doing this, I should be getting more clients, I should be looking this way, I should be making more money, whatever. Like, on some level, this like feeling of shoulds, this, and again, entitlement is a weird word too, but it's just this case of the shoulds. It's a waste of your energy. Like, I just feel like that like should feeling is based on skewed expectations a lot of time. It's a lack of acknowledgement of genetic variables and certain privileges. It usually implies a primary focus on the external and comparison game versus looking inward at what we can do better. And it misses the mark as far as pointing you in a productive direction where you take productive action, which, let me say this as clearly as possible, is ultimately the only thing that's going to lead to a positive outcome is you doing stuff. So when we have this feeling of like, why don't I look like I lift? Like asking that question and feeling like you should look better, you should look more muscular or whatever. There's an element of that that's productive insofar as it leads you down a path, maybe to a podcast episode like this, where you can say, you know what? I feel like I should be X, but I'm not. So let me be a detective and find out why. I think that can be a totally healthy, mentally healthy line of logic that you go down, which it absolutely can. There's the version of this that leads to a lot of kicking and screaming and negativity and resentment and lack of enjoyment, and that I really just want to help people unravel. There's the part of the frustration that leads to positive change. My therapist would call it like positive anxiety, that kind of that those kinds of feelings that creep up that ultimately lead to positive action, even if they are uncomfortable in the moment. And that can be something that's here. So I get that. And I know we've waffled for the first 10 minutes here, but I get that. I want those feelings to be not spent in the kicking, screaming, resentment, comparison, frustration, lack of enjoyment state of mind. And if we can channel them into the more positive, objective, constructive, being a detective as to why, that sort of way of thinking, that can be really great. And that's actually, again, ultimately the only way that will actually lead to a positive outcome, right? It's you dealing with your situation, doing what you can from where you are with the tools that you have, right? Cool. All right. So here's the deal. This is not a complicated conversation. You only have two options. You know, if you're like, I don't look like I lift, it's for one, if not two reasons. You have too much body fat or not enough muscle. That's literally it. Like, why don't I look like I lift? You don't have enough muscle to look like you lift, or you have a good amount of muscle, but it's covered by, enough body fat that it doesn't look the way you want it to look. And that is it. Those are your only two modifiable variables here. You can't change your genetics or your muscles insert, your bone structure, your like vascularity, like on many levels. You can't change that stuff, right? You can't change the genetic variables that do play a role in physique and body comp. What you can do is you can build more muscle where you want it with exercises that work certain muscles. You want bigger glutes, work your glutes. You want bigger biceps, work your biceps. And you can lose fat everywhere, right? You cannot spot reduce meaningfully. And I put that word meaningfully there because some of you guys might be aware that there was some recent research that looked at basically like revisiting this idea of spot reduction. And they did see that I think people were training their abdominals, that there was a slight reduction in body fat there compared to the group that did not do that. But it was so meaningless in terms of absolute magnitude, like real world applicability, that I think we can still say that spot reduction is not, like, if you're like, I really want to get more lean arms, it's like the best route to doing that is by losing 10 pounds, not by doing more arm work. So I still think that just from a way of communicating it, we still need to be talking about this as you lose fat everywhere. Yeah, train the muscles and areas, I guess, that you want to build muscle, but don't expect that training to have a meaningful impact on the way they ultimately look. Fat loss is going to do a whole lot more. And when you lose fat and you're in a calorie deficit, you don't get to choose where that fat is lost from. So which should you do? Should you focus on the fat loss side? Should you focus on the muscle gain side? It obviously depends. It depends which of those you have more room for improvement in, right? And so there's an assumption in that someone in this situation, right, being frustrated that they don't look like they lift, is actually lifting the right way, right? Like lifting hard enough for long enough with the right nutrition and recovery to warrant frustration. And I recommend that you at least look at the muscle building bucket first, not because I think it is ultimately, like if we're looking at fat loss or muscle gain, which one's going to have a greater magnitude in my pursuit of looking like I lift? It's totally contextual from where you are, 100%. Speaking in generalities, though, the fat loss, I think, might, again, I'm using some intuition to kind of imagine an archetype of a person that would be saying this. Quite often, that is a quicker route to physique change. Let's be real. It takes a long time to build muscle. It takes you can lose fat like on average 4 times as fast as you gain muscle, if not more. That's a kind of back of the envelope multiplier there. And so for a lot of people, fat loss is probably a quicker route to seeing meaningful physique change, right? It's easier to lose 10 pounds of fat than it is to gain 10 pounds of muscle. But the reason I would recommend, and kind of why I, in chronological order, put this earlier in the podcast, why I recommend looking at the muscle building side first, it's not complicated. It's way more fun than trying to lose fat. Like, I would rather you check the box to make all of the boxes to build enough muscle before going into a deficit and going through that frustration only to find out that you didn't have enough muscle in the first place, which is fine because you could just go do that after. But living a life with the goal of building muscle and doing all the things in your day-to-day life that are more geared towards building muscle is a way more fun life than the kind of life that you have to live to be in a calorie deficit. So I recommend going through this list first. And if you are a person who's like, I don't look like I lift, I want to look like I lift, I'm frustrated, I don't look like I lift, and you've been lifting for a year, like, I don't want to hear it, and I don't want to hear it is never something I would say to somebody, but you get what I mean, right? If you've been training 2 times a week, which by the way, I'm not scoffing at for health, 2 times a week, resistance training is unbelievable for health, and you can get you the vast majority of the health benefits if you do 2 hard full body days a week, 100%. But from I don't look muscular, yeah, I'm not surprised. You're not going to build, right? Like looking muscular, by the way, means far exceeding the amount of muscle you would need for health. Like the irony is, like, if you look at, I'll use myself as an example. I have way more muscle than I would need if my only goal was health. Like I have muscle that is purely helping me with aesthetics and not necessarily making me any healthier or meaningfully healthier, right? If you've been doing CrossFit or group class or Pilates, Orange Theory, F45, like, yeah, I'm not surprised you don't look like you lift. If you've been program hopping and you always flip-flop between trying to lose fat or bulking and then I'm cutting and then I'm bulking and I'm cutting and I'm flip-flopping every couple of weeks because I feel fat, then I feel small, and you have no structure, no consistency, yeah, like, I'm not surprised you don't look like you lift. If you don't focus on hitting your protein, if you sleep like crap, if you take random weeks and months off all the time, you're like, yeah, I had a couple things going on, so I just didn't work out this week, which, by the way, totally happens sometimes. I'm talking about doing that, a third of the year where you're like, every time something pops up, you throw everything to the wind. Like, yeah, I'm not surprised. Like, if you aren't really pushing yourself to progress week to week and training really freaking hard, again, focused on the almighty progressive overload, then yeah, I'm not surprised you don't look like you lift. If you've been lifting for a few years, at least 3 to 5 times a week in a proper hypertrophy program, focused on training hard and progressive overload with good exercise selection, you're not always trying to lose fat, you're eating enough protein, you're sleeping well, you're not program hopping, you're not taking random weeks and months off whenever something pops up, then yeah, I think then if you can check all those boxes, you have a right to say, you know what, I probably have enough muscle to look like I lift, which again is a subjective thing. And you and I might look at your progress photos and be like, actually, like, I think you look like you lift. It's just my version of my definition of that is just different than yours. So again, this entire discussion is, clouded by the fact that we could have very different definitions of what that means. But if you've been lifting for a few years, 3 to 5 times a week in a program that is geared towards muscle growth, where you're focused on training hard, close to failure with good exercises, trying to progress week to week, not always trying to lose fat, right? Eating enough protein, sleeping well, not program hopping, and not just randomly taking weeks and months off all the time, then yeah, if you're doing that stuff, then I think you are checking the big rock boxes here. And then if you still didn't look like you lift and you were doing all that stuff, it probably comes down to A, your expectations and your definition of that is very different than mine. And B, maybe you just haven't been doing it long enough, or you think you're doing some of that stuff well enough and you're not. But pretending like you are definitively doing that stuff well, then it is the expectation of end result. It's also the expectation of rate of progress, and probably just need to keep doing what you're doing. And again, the reason I think you should check those boxes first is pretty simple. The alternative sucks way more. Like, I'd rather, like, let's call a spade here. Like, being in a deficit's not super fun. And if you can spend a year building muscle, eating enough food, having quality training, feeling really good energy, good sleep, good libido, good everything, because you're fueling yourself optimally, and that can improve and move you towards that goal because you're really focused on building muscle, that's a way more fun life than being like, I'm going to spend the next year trying to lose fat. Like, yeah, okay, again, we're talking about end outcomes. That's a kind of a separate conversation. Just as far as fun, like quality of life, mental health, physical health, it's probably more enjoyable to do it this way. But obviously there's going to be some combination of both of those, right? And like, as I type this out, I think there are people that are going to say, nah, Jordan, I'm doing all that, right? I'm lifting 3 to 5 times a week for years, good program. Again, all the things I just listed, I don't need to waste your time with it again. You get it. Like, fine. Then you are maybe in a place where you can really consider if losing fat is something you want to do. And as I type this out, and I feel like people already know this, like nobody came to the podcast and didn't realize that body composition changes can be achieved by building muscle and losing fat. Like, I think everyone on some level was like, I either need more muscle or I need to be leaner. This, like, I don't look like I lift, again, is steeped in this feeling of like, I feel like I shouldn't have to work any harder than this. Like, I'm already doing enough. And I'm going to speak in a little bit more of a tough love tone. This isn't necessarily how I would talk to a one-on-one client or something, but I think it's important to have somewhere in your internal dialogue, somewhere in there, somebody should speak like this in your internal dialogue. It shouldn't be the only person speaking in your kind of conscience here. But like the thing that I think people might need to at least hear is I don't know what to tell you. Like, what do we do with that? You're like, I feel like I'm doing enough already. You're like, I shouldn't have to work harder. It's like, okay, like now what? You know, like, so what? Like, I don't know what to tell you. What do we do with that? You're like, I feel like I should be doing enough. Like, the facts are, like, you're doing X. It's not yielding the result that you want. And so what do we do with that? We have to look at X. We can't look at, you know, what other people are doing, what other people have achieved. That is not a fruitful endeavor. It's not a good place to be spending your energy. Like, the facts are, your only options are losing fat in a calorie deficit or gaining muscle with hard training, enough protein, good programming, enough calories, all that stuff. Like, gaining muscle is probably more fun. Losing fat is absolutely an option, and on average, probably something people should look at some point if they're looking to, improve, air quote, improve body composition, look more muscular. It's certainly a side of the coin that I think is very meaningful on average, right? Like, and again, sometimes I get a smidge triggered with all of this should stuff because it really pains me deep down to see people spend a lot of emotion living in that headspace of, I deserve better for what I'm doing. I should look like this. I should have this result. When, like, you don't. And any energy that we are going to expend on trying to figure out why that is the case is only going to be done in an objective, positive, productive, constructive mindset on how to move forward. I will not let you spend time kicking and screaming about why X is not happening. Like, we can look at why X is not happening, but for the sole purpose of trying to make positive changes to it to get a more favorable outcome. And I'm not angry at people when they feel this way. Of course not. This happens all the time with fat loss. People feel like they're doing all the things. I'm eating these many calories. I'm doing the steps. I'm doing the workouts, and I'm not losing fat. I'm not losing fat as fast as I should, or my calories are so low already, and I'm not losing fat. And it's like, I'm sympathetic to the frustration, but there's that frustration isn't going to change the facts in the situation that we're living in. So, like, it's down to how quickly can you package up that frustration, use it to figure out what positive changes to make and start making them. That is the only benefit of those negative emotions, is their ability. I don't want to get too, listen, all emotions are valid. Emotions don't all need to be means to positive action, but they're more productive when they are. You know, I don't think negative emotions are bad. I think that they can be a really great tool for making positive changes. And I think this is a scenario here where I would really, 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 really lean into that. It's way more positive to look inward and say, I'm not getting what I think I deserve. Why not? And what can I do about it within my situation? You know, I don't look like I lift is a combination of your expectations are crazy skewed. Your definition of that is way off. You have too much body fat. You don't have enough muscle. So we can look at that from it's like a triangle here. We can figure out, where is your biggest room for improvement to get happier? Is it adjusting your expectations by being objective and saying, you know what? Those expectations are built on information I don't really have, on like a misunderstanding of how fast I should be building muscle and how long this takes and what it takes. And, expectations that have been built from crazy combination of curated and fake highlight reel content that I consume on social media 24/7, right? So this idea that you either have too much body fat, you don't have enough muscle, or your expectations are skewed. Look at all three of those buckets. Which of them has the most room for improvement in terms of, like, actually making this a positive experience? So, in summary here, probably good to check your expectations and definition of look like you lift. Remember, lifting is about more than aesthetics, and you probably do look like you lift, and you do all the time when you do all that important, fun, physical shit in your life, whether that's day-to-day stuff or going for that hike or moving that furniture or whatever, carrying something heavy, scooping up your kids. Like, that is also, if not primarily, what it's about. You really only have two options from an aesthetic change perspective: fat loss and muscle gain. Muscle gain's more fun, so definitely go through that checklist first. Training hard for hypertrophy more than twice a week, working hard in your sessions, close to failure, focused on getting stronger, progressing week to week. eating enough protein, consistent with your nutrition, sleeping and recovering for long enough. If you've been doing that, you're left with trying to lose fat or adjusting expectations, and I recommend at least a bit of the latter, the expectation sides. Life is better when you're not using the social media highlight reel to base your expectations off of. Probably one of the benefits I think of hiring a coach is decreasing the noise, right? One of the things I do, it's not even a me thing. It's just like as a coach is I help tunnel vision clients a little bit more and into what their own experience is. And we start comparing internally. We stop comparing externally. And that is one of the best gifts I can give people, is to just be like, hey, like block out that noise, maybe unfollow these people, stop consuming that content. Let's talk about you. Let's look at you. Let's try and figure out what's going to make you happier, give you a better quality of life. That I think is a way more fruitful way to spend our time. So hopefully that was a bit insightful. The irony is, as I was making, I know I'm going to ramble now. If you're looking for more really concrete, helpful information, like it's been said. But like as I was writing the notes for this podcast, I was like, people know this shit. You know that you need. It's not you don't know what things are going to help you. It's that you obviously have a misunderstanding of potentially the genetic components and how much work certain things take, right? Like obviously everybody knows, I want to be more muscular. You got to build more muscle. You're like, I want to look leaner. You got to get leaner. Like people know that. It's like they just might not know exactly what it costs to do those things. And so like, yeah, I get you're frustrated if you have been lifting for a year and you thought that after a year you'd look mega jacked. Like that is a frustrating experience, but it's not frustrating because you didn't get what you should have. It's frustrating because you thought you'd get more than what is actually realistic. So really think of it as that triangle of you can build muscle, you can lose fat, and you can adjust your expectations. And I would really look at all three of those buckets. And so I'll leave it there. Thank you guys for listening. Again, if you made it this far, I got to tell you, I gotta start I'm never going to have ads on this podcast, but I must ask for reviews. I've been doing this podcast for too long without ever mentioning the fact that doing reviews, whether you go on Spotify and you give it a 5-star review or you go on Apple Podcasts and you leave a review, it's super ridiculously helpful. And I've asked for a review in the last couple episodes and there have been some, and it means the world to me. So thank you if you can do that. It would mean a lot to me. All right, see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Where Optimal Meets Practical. If you liked the episode, it would mean the world to me if you posted a screenshot to your social media or left a 5-star review on iTunes. That stuff really helps. If you ever want to get in touch with me, just shoot me a DM on Instagram @JordanLipsFitness. I'm always around to chat. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.